He walked into the city's most luxurious restaurant, confident, untouchable, and in love with his new girlfriend. But when his eyes met his pregnant ex-wife's across the room, everything he thought he knew about himself shattered. It was supposed to be a perfect evening. The kind that makes headlines. The kind people envy. The city lights shimmered against the tall glass walls of La Lumiere, a place where the rich came to prove just how rich they were. Outside, valets opened doors to luxury cars, Bentleys, Ferraris, sleek black limousines gliding up like scenes from a movie. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast soft golden light over marble floors, and a violinist played a song so elegant it almost didn't feel real. And walking through those doors was Ethan Blake, the man everyone in the room recognized. Tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly confident, Ethan was the kind of man who didn't need an introduction. His name alone opened doors, moved markets, and made headlines. He was the billionaire CEO of Blake Industries, a self-made powerhouse who built an empire before turning 40. Tonight, he was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a silk tie the exact color of his steel gray eyes. Every step he took radiated quiet power. Beside him, his girlfriend Vanessa Monroe, a model known for her stunning looks and sharp tongue, walked as if the spotlight belonged to her. Her red dress shimmered like fire under the lights, and the diamond necklace around her neck caught every camera flash. They looked perfect, powerful, untouchable. The hostess led them to their table near the window, the best seat in the house, reserved only for VIPs. Ethan pulled out Vanessa's chair with a polite smile, his every move smooth, deliberate, practiced. It was supposed to be just another evening of fine dining and casual luxury. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As he glanced around the restaurant, his gaze lingered for a moment on the staff, waiters moving gracefully, trays of champagne sparkling in their hands. Then something caught his eye. A woman. At first, he thought he was imagining it. A figure in a simple blue dress, standing near the corner, adjusting a tray. She wasn't laughing or showing off like the women around her. She moved quietly, almost invisibly, but with a kind of grace money couldn't buy. Then she turned, and Ethan's entire world stopped. Her face, soft, familiar, unforgettable. The gentle eyes he used to wake up to. The lips that once spoke his name like it meant something. Lena. The name echoed in his mind like a whisper from another life. His ex-wife. The woman he'd once promised forever to before ambition came first, and love came last. His breath caught in his throat. For a second, he thought he must be dreaming. But no, it was her. Same soft brown hair, tied neatly back. Same delicate smile that never quite reached her eyes. Except this time, there was something different. Her hand rested on her belly. Round. Noticeable. She was pregnant. Ethan's pulse quickened. A dozen thoughts collided in his head all at once. Was she married again? How far along was she? Why here of all places? And then, just as confusion turned to shock, Lena's eyes met his. For a moment, the world fell completely silent. The music faded. The chatter disappeared. Even Vanessa's voice, usually loud enough to fill any room, became nothing more than background noise. All that existed in that instant was the space between them, filled with everything they never said, everything that was left broken. Lena froze, tray in hand. Her lips parted in surprise, but she quickly looked away, as if the sight of him was too much to bear. She adjusted her uniform, straightened her back, and continued serving tables, pretending he wasn't there. But Ethan couldn't look away. Memories came flooding back, uninvited. Lena laughing in their old apartment, flour on her hands as she tried to bake. Lena crying quietly when he missed her birthday because of another business trip. Lena standing at the door the day she left, her voice trembling as she said, "You already have what you love most, Ethan, your work." He had brushed it off back then, too proud to admit the truth. He told himself she was overreacting. That love could wait. That success was what mattered. And now, standing in that luxurious restaurant surrounded by wealth and applause, he finally realized what he'd lost. Vanessa's voice snapped him back. "Ethan, you okay?" she asked, her red lips curving into a smile as she sipped her wine. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He forced a smile, but his hands felt heavy. "Just thought I recognized someone." Vanessa laughed lightly. Well, I'm sure whoever it was isn't nearly as interesting as me. Ethan didn't answer, because at that exact moment, Lena turned again, and he noticed the name tag pinned to her apron. Lena Blake. She hadn't even changed her last name. His chest tightened. He felt something he hadn't in years. Guilt. Maybe regret. Maybe both. The sight of her in that uniform, working while pregnant, serving people who didn't even look her way. It didn't fit. Not with the woman he remembered. Not with the woman who once shared his home, his dreams, his heart. He wanted to stand up, to go to her, to ask why. But before he could move, Vanessa leaned in, placing her manicured hand over his. Ethan, she whispered, her voice playful. Let's order. I'm starving. He nodded numbly, opening the menu, though he couldn't see a single word on it. All he could see was Lena, moving from table to table with quiet determination. Every time she smiled at a customer, he could tell it was forced. Every time she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, he remembered how he used to do it for her. The dinner dragged on. Vanessa talked endlessly about a new campaign deal, about parties, about people Ethan couldn't care less about. But he barely heard a thing. His mind was elsewhere, back at that corner of the restaurant, where the woman he once loved was pretending she didn't see him. And when she finally disappeared into the kitchen, Ethan's hand clenched into a fist under the table. He didn't know why he cared so much, not after everything that happened. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just curiosity. It was something else. A pull. A memory. A truth he thought he'd buried years ago, now staring him right in the face. And as the night went on, Ethan Blake, the man who had everything, couldn't shake the feeling that something in that room was about to change his life forever. Vanessa's laughter rang through the air like glass, sharp, flawless, but empty. The kind of laugh meant for cameras, not hearts. The restaurant was alive with chatter and music, but to Ethan, the world had narrowed down to one corner, the table where Lena sat. He couldn't look away. She wasn't the same woman he remembered. Her hair was shorter now, tied up neatly, a few strands framing her face. She wore no diamonds, no luxury, just a simple dress, and that soft glow only mothers had. Every gesture she made was gentle, careful. The way she held her glass, the way her hand occasionally drifted protectively to her belly. She looked peaceful, but not happy. It was the kind of peace people wore after the storm, when they were too tired to fight anymore. Across from her sat another woman, laughing, chatting, clearly trying to lighten the mood. Lena smiled politely, but her eyes, they told a different story. A story of sleepless nights, of doing everything alone, of holding herself together even when life kept falling apart. Ethan's throat tightened. He remembered her laugh, soft, melodic, like the sound of rain. He remembered how she used to wake up before him just to make coffee because she knew he'd rush off to meetings without eating. He remembered the last night they'd spent together, the way she'd stood by the window, tears streaking down her face, whispering, "You're already gone, Ethan. Even when you're here." He had walked out that night without looking back. He told himself it was for the best, that love could wait, that his company needed him more than she did. But now, sitting just a few tables away, watching her laugh through pain, he realized how wrong he'd been. "Ethan," Vanessa's voice sliced through his thoughts. "Are you even listening to me?" He blinked, forcing his gaze away from Lena. "Yeah, of course," he said, though his tone made it obvious he wasn't. Vanessa raised a perfectly shaped brow, her eyes narrowing slightly. She followed his line of sight, and then she saw her. The waitress, the simple blue dress, the pregnant belly. "Oh," Vanessa said, her lips curving into a slow, almost cruel smile. "That's her, isn't it? The famous ex-wife." Ethan froze. His jaw clenched. "Vanessa not here." But she didn't stop. "She's what? Working here? Wow." She laughed lightly, but her words were sharp. "I guess not everyone gets a fairy tale ending, huh?" Ethan's hand tightened around his glass. "Enough." Vanessa leaned forward, resting her chin on her manicured hand. "Relax, Ethan. I'm just saying, you dodged a bullet. Can you imagine what people would say if your wife was serving tables while you're out signing billion-dollar deals?" Her voice carried, and a few heads turned. Ethan felt heat rise in his chest, Not anger at her, but at himself. Because for the first time, he didn't see Lena as part of his past. He saw her as the reminder of everything he'd lost chasing things that didn't matter. I said enough, Ethan said, this time more firmly. Vanessa frowned, clearly caught off guard by his tone. Fine, she said coolly, sipping her wine. Don't get all sentimental on me. But Ethan's attention was gone again, back to the corner, where Lena was gathering her things. Her friend had left, and she was alone now, gently rubbing her belly, lost in thought. He couldn't help wondering, who was the father? The question burned in his chest. Was it someone new? Did she move on? Or was it? He stopped himself. No, that was impossible. Wasn't it? He didn't even realize he was staring until Lena suddenly looked up, and their eyes met. For a second, neither of them moved. The noise, the laughter, the music, all of it disappeared. There was only that heavy, electric silence that always comes when two hearts that once beat together suddenly remember. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. It wasn't anger he saw, it was something else. Sadness, maybe. Or acceptance. She quickly looked away, standing up and walking toward the kitchen, her steps small and hurried. Ethan felt his pulse race. Something inside him refused to let her go again. Not like this. Not without a word. I'll be right back, he said suddenly, pushing his chair back. Vanessa frowned. Where are you going? He didn't answer. He just stood, straightened his jacket, and followed Lena's path toward the kitchen. As he walked past the other diners, he could feel their eyes on him. The billionaire leaving his glamorous girlfriend mid-dinner to chase someone in an apron. But for once, he didn't care. The air changed the moment he stepped past the kitchen door. The laughter and music from the dining area were replaced by the clatter of dishes, the hiss of pans, and the sharp scent of garlic and butter. Cooks moved around quickly, calling orders, plating food. And there she was, standing by the counter, wiping her eyes quickly before anyone could see. Lena, he said softly. She froze, the cloth slipping from her hands. Slowly, she turned around, and the years between them vanished in an instant. Ethan, she breathed, her voice barely audible. Her expression was a mix of shock, pain, and disbelief. What are you doing here? He took a step forward, his throat dry. I didn't know you worked here. She gave a small, tired laugh. Of course you didn't. Why would you? Her words hit him harder than he expected. He looked at her, really looked, at the exhaustion in her eyes, the faint dark circles, the small crack in her smile. You shouldn't be on your feet like this, he said quietly. You're pregnant? She interrupted, her chin lifting slightly. Yeah, I am. And before you ask, it's none of your business. Ethan swallowed hard. Lena, No, she said, holding up a trembling hand. Don't. You don't get to do this. Not after disappearing from my life like I was nothing. Her voice cracked. For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but she didn't. She just stood there, fierce, fragile, and heartbreakingly beautiful. Ethan wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Because she was right. And as he stood there in the middle of that noisy kitchen, with the smell of food and the sound of plates around them, Ethan realized something terrifying. The woman he had once loved, the one he thought he'd lost forever, was standing right in front of him again. And she was carrying a secret that could change everything. Halfway through dinner, Ethan couldn't take it anymore. Vanessa was still talking, something about an upcoming magazine shoot, or a gala, or maybe both. But her words faded into meaningless noise. The clinking of glasses, the soft violin music, the hum of conversation, everything seemed distant, muffled, like the world itself had gone out of focus. All he could see was her, Lena, sitting just a few tables away, calm yet distant, as if she had built an invisible wall between herself and the chaos around her. The sight of her had cracked something open inside him, something he had spent years sealing shut. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't pretend anymore. Excuse me, he muttered, pushing back his chair. Vanessa looked up from her phone, puzzled. Where are you going? I'll be right back, he said quickly, without meeting her eyes. Before she could protest, Ethan stood, straightened his jacket, and walked across the dining room. Each step felt heavier than the last. The restaurant seemed to shrink around him, the chandeliers dimming, the chatter fading, time slowing. All he could hear was the rhythmic pounding of his heart. Lena looked up just as he stopped beside her table. For a moment, everything froze. The years between them collapsed into a single heartbeat. The world, the waiters, the music, the people, blurred away, leaving only the two of them standing in a silence thick enough to drown in. "Lena," he finally said, his voice softer than he intended. "It's been a while." She smiled faintly, polite but distant, the kind of smile you give someone you used to know, but no longer trust. "Ethan," she said evenly. "Yes, it has." The sound of her voice, calm, measured, familiar, stirred something deep in him. He had forgotten how gentle she sounded when she said his name. He hesitated, his gaze flickering to her stomach, the gentle curve beneath her dress. The air left his lungs for a second. "You're," his voice faltered, "expecting." Her expression didn't change. "Yes," she said simply. 7 months now." There it was again, that calm composure, the kind he used to admire. But now, it only reminded him of how much pain she had learned to hide. He nodded, trying to find something to say. Anything that didn't sound as empty as the silence stretching between them. "You look good," he said lamely. Her smile tightened just enough to show it was forced. "I'm doing fine." For a few seconds, neither spoke. The world around them carried on. Waiters passing, wine being poured, the soft clatter of silverware. But for Ethan, everything had stopped. He swallowed hard. "Lena, She looked up, her eyes steady. "Don't, Ethan. Please. Don't do that." "Do what?" "Start a conversation you don't know how to finish." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was tired, worn, the kind of tone that said she'd already lived through this conversation 100 times in her head, and none of them ended well. He took a quiet breath, gathering the courage to ask what had been haunting him since the moment he saw her. "Is it?" "No," she said quickly, but gently, cutting him off before the words even formed. "It's not yours, Ethan." The words hit him like a blow. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. "Not yours." It echoed in his mind like a verdict, final, sharp, and merciless. He had faced losses before. Deals collapsing, companies walking away, fortunes disappearing overnight. But this was different. This was a loss he couldn't measure, couldn't fix, couldn't buy back. He nodded slowly, forcing himself to stay composed. "I'm happy for you," he managed to say, though his voice cracked on the last word. Lena's eyes softened, just a little. She knew him too well, knew how hard it was for him to say that, to sound sincere when he was falling apart inside. "Thank you," she said quietly. And then, after a long pause, she added something he didn't expect, something that cut even deeper. "I hope you're happy too." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. He wanted to say yes, to tell her his life was perfect, that he was richer than ever, more successful than ever, that he had everything he'd ever wanted. But the truth caught in his throat, because for the first time in a long time, he realized he wasn't happy at all. Before he could speak, a familiar voice broke through the fragile quiet. "Ethan," Vanessa said sharply, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she appeared behind him. Her tone carried the kind of annoyance only a woman like her could master. "Are you done catching up? The food's getting cold." The moment shattered like glass. Lena looked up at Vanessa, tall, glamorous, everything Lena used to think she should be, and then back at Ethan. Her eyes flickered with something soft and painful, not jealousy, not bitterness, just quiet sadness. The kind of sadness that comes from realizing that the person you once loved had already moved on, even if you hadn't. "Of course," Ethan said stiffly, turning toward Vanessa. "Coming." He turned back to Lena, wanting to say something, anything, but she had already picked up her fork and turned her attention to her plate. The conversation was over. Ethan stood there for another heartbeat, lost in the noise of the restaurant, in the laughter, the clinking glasses, the hum of other people's joy, all of it pressing in around him like static. And then he walked away, each step heavier than the last. When he sat back down across from Vanessa, everything on the table looked wrong. The wine too red, the lights too bright, the laughter too loud. Vanessa said something, but he didn't hear. He was somewhere else, back at that table, replaying every word, every glance, every unspoken truth. Not yours. The phrase echoed like thunder in his mind. If it wasn't his, then whose? And why, after all this time, did it still feel like she belonged to him somehow? Like a chapter he had closed too early, but could never stop rereading. He lifted his glass, pretending to drink, but his hands trembled. For the first time in his life, Ethan Blake, the man who built empires, who could control markets, who could bend the world to his will, realized there was one thing he could never control: the past. And worse, the woman who had once loved him enough to dream of a future he was too blind to see. As Vanessa kept talking, her words a blur of vanity and noise, Ethan looked out across the restaurant one last time. Lena was gone, her table empty, her presence vanished like a ghost that came only to remind him what he'd lost. And for the first time in years, Ethan Blake felt truly, utterly alone. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his penthouse bedroom, the city lights flickering through the glass walls, the steady hum of the world outside, but his mind wouldn't rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, Lena. That calm face, that small, knowing smile, and those 3 words that refused to leave his head. It's not yours. But why did that hurt so much? He rolled over, restless, staring at the ceiling. The sheets felt cold, the silence heavy. Vanessa had fallen asleep hours ago, her perfume still hanging in the air. But even that, once alluring, now felt suffocating. Ethan reached for his phone, scrolled through his contacts, then stopped. His thumb hovered over a number he hadn't called in years. Dr. Hayes, an old family friend who worked at the same clinic Lena used to visit back when they were married. He hesitated. It was wrong. Private. But the doubt, the ache, the guilt, it was too much to bear. He dialed. Dr. Hayes speaking. Came the familiar voice on the other end, calm and professional. Paul, it's Ethan Blake. There was a pause. Ethan, it's been a while. I need to ask you something, Ethan said, his voice low. It's about Lena. A long silence. Then, cautiously, what about her? She's pregnant, Ethan said. 7 months. I just saw her last night. She said the baby isn't mine. Dr. Hayes sighed softly. Ethan, this isn't something I should discuss. Please, Ethan interrupted, his voice cracking. I need to know the truth. Another pause. The sound of papers shuffling, the faint hum of an office in the background. Then, Dr. Hayes's voice came back, quiet but firm. Ethan, the baby is yours. Time stopped. What? Ethan whispered, gripping the phone tighter. She confirmed it months ago, Dr. Hayes said gently. But she told us she didn't want you involved. She said you'd been through a difficult divorce, that your lawyers were unkind. Ethan's throat went dry. He remembered those months, the shouting, the lawyers fighting over every detail, the coldness he'd hidden behind. He'd thought he was protecting himself. In reality, he had been destroying the one person who had loved him unconditionally. She didn't want to bring her child into that world. Dr. Hayes continued softly. She said it wasn't a world built for love, only control. Ethan closed his eyes, his chest tightening painfully. The image of her sitting in that restaurant, serene, strong, holding the life they'd created, and he hadn't even known. She did all this alone, he whispered. Yes, came the quiet reply, and she never once asked for help. When the call ended, Ethan just sat there, staring out at the city skyline. The glittering towers, the endless lights, they all looked meaningless now. For the first time in his life, the empire he had built felt like a cage. He had everything, but not the one thing that mattered. Not her. Not their child. The realization hit him like a wave. Every boardroom victory, every luxury car, every photo in a magazine, none of it mattered now. He had spent years climbing to the top, only to find out he had left his heart at the bottom. He thought back to the night before, the way Lena looked when she saw him. Calm, graceful, not angry, not bitter, just distant. That was what hurt most. She had finally healed, but without him. He leaned back in his chair, his reflection faint in the glass behind the city. For the first time, Ethan didn't see the confident CEO the world worshipped. He saw a man who had traded love for success and lost both in the process. A single tear rolled down his cheek. He hadn't cried in years. He didn't even know he still could. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Vanessa's voice echoed, shallow laughter, empty compliments, endless talk about fame and appearances. He realized how hollow it all was. How hollow he had become. He thought about Lena, working long hours, going to checkups alone, preparing a nursery in some small apartment while he sat in board meetings discussing profit margins. She had carried his child while he carried on pretending she no longer existed. Ethan stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window and pressed a hand against the glass, staring down at the glittering city. His reflection stared back, but he didn't recognize that man anymore. For years, he had believed love was a distraction, that emotions made you weak, that caring too deeply could cost you everything. Now he understood the opposite was true. Without love, he had already lost everything. He picked up his car keys. The clock read 3:17 a.m., but he didn't care. He had to see her, had to tell her he knew, had to tell her he was sorry, for the divorce, for the cruelty, for abandoning her when she needed him most. He needed her to know that he wanted to be there, not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, but as a father. He drove through the sleeping city, headlights slicing through the darkness. The streets were empty, and every red light felt like a punishment. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. When he finally reached her neighborhood, a quiet part of town far removed from the noise and luxury of his world, he parked outside her small apartment. The lights were off, but a soft glow flickered through one of the windows. He could see her silhouette, rocking slowly in a chair, one hand on her stomach. He stood there for a long time, just watching. She looked peaceful, content, beautiful. He wanted to knock, to say her name, to tell her everything. But then he stopped, because for the first time, he understood something deeper. She had found peace without him. She had rebuilt her world, not from wealth or fame, but from quiet courage. And maybe, just maybe, his punishment was to stand there and realize that she didn't need saving anymore. He whispered into the night, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Lena." The wind carried the words away, soft and invisible. As he turned to leave, he looked back one last time. Inside, she smiled faintly, as if sensing something, as if she somehow knew he was there. And in that moment, Ethan Blake, the man who once had everything, finally understood what it meant to lose it all. Because the truth wasn't just that the baby was his. The truth was that he had never deserved her love in the first place. 3 days later, the morning sun washed the city in soft gold. Birds chirped faintly outside as Lena locked her apartment door, balancing a small tote bag and her phone. Her life had become simple, quiet mornings, doctor's appointments, preparing for the baby. Peaceful, predictable, until she looked up. Leaning against her car was Ethan. For a second, she froze, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks on her. He looked different. Gone was the perfectly styled hair, the tailored suit, the man who commanded rooms with confidence and power. In his place stood someone raw, human, and broken in all the right ways. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He straightened up, his hands shoved nervously into his coat pockets. "Hey," he said quietly, "please don't be angry. I just needed to see you." Lena sighed, glancing around the parking lot. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," he admitted, taking a careful step closer. "But I found out the truth. About the baby." Her breath caught. The world seemed to still around her. The sound of passing cars, the rustle of leaves, it all faded into silence. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. "How did you?" she began softly. "It doesn't matter," he interrupted gently. "What matters is that I know now. And I swear, Lena, I don't want to take anything from you. I don't want control. His voice broke, raw and unguarded. "I just want to be part of his life. If you'll let me. Not as a CEO, not as your ex-husband, just as a father. A father who's sorry." The sincerity in his tone shattered something inside her. For months, she had built walls around her heart, walls to protect herself from pain, from disappointment from him. But standing there, hearing him say those words, she realized how tired she was of pretending she didn't still care. "Ethan," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "It's not that simple." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know, but maybe it's not impossible either." A long silence followed, the kind that carries years of unspoken words, unhealed wounds, and unforgotten love. Lena looked down at her belly, one hand instinctively resting on it. "You hurt me, Ethan," she said softly. "You made me feel small, replaceable, like love wasn't enough." "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and I've hated myself every day since I realized what I lost. I can't change what I did, Lena, but I can change who I am. I want to do better, be better, for him, for you." Her tears fell freely now. "You really have changed, haven't you?" He gave a faint, trembling smile. "Maybe seeing you again reminded me what really matters." For the first time in a long time, Lena saw the man she once fell in love with, not the billionaire, not the CEO, not the headline everyone knew. Just Ethan, the man who used to dance with her barefoot in the kitchen, the man who once held her like she was his whole world. She brushed a tear from her cheek. "Then maybe," she whispered, "he'll get to know his father after all." Ethan's eyes softened. Relief washed over his face, like a sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "Thank you," he said, and it wasn't just gratitude. It was a promise. They stood there in silence for a while, no contracts, no conditions, no blame. Just two people learning how to start again. Finally, Lena smiled faintly. "You should come to the next appointment," she said. "It's on Thursday. You can hear the heartbeat." Ethan's breath hitched. "I'd love that," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "More than anything." She nodded. "Then it's a start." As she turned to unlock her car, Ethan called out one last time. "Lena." She looked back, sunlight catching the tears on her cheeks. He took a deep breath. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving I won't fail you again." For a moment, she just stared at him. The man who had once broken her heart, now standing there with it in his hands again. But this time, something was different. This time, she believed him. "Then don't tell me," she said softly. "Show me." And with that, she got into her car and drove away, leaving Ethan standing there, watching her go with a mixture of hope and fear and love that words could never capture. As her car disappeared down the street, Ethan whispered to himself, "I will." Weeks passed. Ethan kept his promise. He showed up to every appointment, every checkup, every moment that mattered. He was there when Lena laughed for the first time in months, when she heard their baby's heartbeat, when she finally stopped looking over her shoulder, expecting him to disappear. He didn't bring gifts or grand gestures. He brought presence, patience, quiet love. And for Lena, that was enough. When their son was finally born, Ethan held him in trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "I'm your dad, and I'm never going anywhere." Lena watched from her hospital bed, her heart full in a way she hadn't thought possible. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Outside, the night sky shimmered. The same city lights that once symbolized ambition now reflected something far greater, redemption. Because sometimes, love doesn't come roaring back with grand confessions or dramatic apologies. Sometimes, it returns quietly, in small moments, in second chances, in the way someone chooses to stay this time. And for Ethan Blake, the billionaire who once thought he had everything, he finally understood the truth. The richest man in the room isn't the one with the most money. It's the one who finally learns what love is worth. He built an empire, but lost the woman who made him human. When fate gave him one last chance, he didn't chase profit. He chose love. Because even billionaires can go bankrupt in the heart. Tell me in the comments, do you believe people can truly change?